also going to learn about her artistic and entrepreneurial journey right here in Baltimore. But right now, really excited to welcome into the show one familiar face and one new face, but both from the Greater Baltimore Committee. Mark Anthony Thomas, great friend of the show, the president and CEO of the GBC, and this time he decided to bring along Pothik Chatterjee, the Chief Economic Officer, as well. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming into the show today to talk about some great stuff. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. We're happy to be here.
Absolutely. So I'll tell you what, let's get right into it, because last time we had you on the show, like you said, it was very introductory, talking about what the Greater Baltimore Committee is all about, talking about your role as the, at that time, fresh CEO and president. So first, let me ask you, I mean, how have you settled into this position over, the few months that it's been since we last talked to you?
No, it's been good. I wanted to spend the first few months learning from folks, getting to know the broader region, also helping people understand why I came to Baltimore, because I thought that was important. But now we're in a place where I'm ready to pivot toward the future and really help people understand, okay, this is what the GBC and the Economic Alliance of Greater Baltimore that was merged in, what our plan is to really transform the economic conditions in the region.
And as Chief Economic Officer of the GBC, Pothik, I imagine that you have quite a big role in that overarching goal. So, I mean, why don't you tell us a little bit about what drew you to the Greater Baltimore Committee?
Sure. Thanks, Gabe, for having me on the show.
Absolutely.
So this is a brand new role for the Greater Baltimore Committee as Chief Economic Officer. It's a huge responsibility to think strategically over the next 10 years about how we revitalize the Greater Baltimore economy and really build and attract the industries of the future, like high tech, thinking about biotech and artificial intelligence, and how we can position Baltimore today and invest in those industries so that we can be part of the most successful cities in America and the world in the future if we do our job right.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because you guys have this big tech hub journey ahead of you, right?
Yeah.
And it's when I read about it, when I did the research leading up to our conversation, it seems like a wonderful opportunity, but also a pretty complex one as well. So I'll start with you here, Mark. Why don't you just give people a brief overview of what becoming a tech hub city is and what rewards come with that?
Yeah, sure. So I'll speak to the essence of why the federal government is investing in this. For the last 20 plus years, when you look at VC maps, the vast majority of startup investments and founders that are funded has been Silicon Valley, California, New York, Boston, the few main hubs. And over time, people are like, enough already, right? There's great ideas, great opportunity across all 50 states. And so there were a number of studies that said, okay, the federal government needs to stop kind of small changing, that we need to think in a much more transformative way. And so when the CHIPS Act was created, which is purely about creating a competitive opportunity for all of our markets, the Tech Hub designation was created to identify 20 markets at the MSA metro level that were organized in collaboration and had a vision around what they wanted their innovation economies to be, and that will help catalyze them to get to the next level. And so the GBC and the peer organizations around the country that are set up like the GBC are best positioned to lead those for the markets as they compete.
And when I hear you say that this came along with the CHIP Act, that to me, the thing that sticks out to me is that this is a very fresh thing.
Yes.
This is a very new thing that the federal government is doing. So how important is it to the Greater Baltimore Committee to be one of the pioneers in this, to be, hey, when you're launching this new program, we want you to think of Baltimore as why the launch for it was so successful. How important is that to your guys' agenda?
Well, for one, it's important to our agenda, but I'll give a little backstory, right?
Sure.
So, as you all know, like I've worked in other markets, and when I was in New York City, we literally had over $1 billion to catalyze the tech ecosystem. And so with the role I had there as their first head of partnerships for Economic Development Corporation, people would fly all over the world to study how has New York transformed from being a financial sector driven economy to being the second largest tech ecosystem in the world. But you knew that it took strategy, intentionality, partnership, and collaboration to make that happen. And so across every industry, from AI, blockchain, cybersecurity, advanced manufacturing, smart cities, New York resonates with the world as a tech hub because of that, right? when you look at other cities, they don't have those kind of resources. And that's not fair to other markets, right? So Morgan has the same talent that you see at the New York City schools, but they don't necessarily have an organization that can say, here is $25, $100 million to get your students into the careers of the future. And so the federal government's job, in my mind, is to really create those equitable opportunities for regions so we can thrive the same way that places that have them can. And the GBC, if we are successful at that, will be positioned to receive a meaningful share of the $10 billion that's been allocated to fund this program.
And I'll hop over to you here, Pothik. I mean, again, like we said, this is a very large undertaking that the Greater Baltimore Committee has chosen to tackle. And I'm curious what things need to happen in the Greater Baltimore area, and even more specifically from the GBC, to get this money, to get these resources that you guys are looking for to add this equitable playing field down here in Baltimore as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So similar to Mark, I also came from a different geography. I moved from Boston to Baltimore 5 years ago. And Boston is a thriving tech hub, specifically in the life sciences area. And what their ecosystem has, and it was very intentional, they passed legislation of $1 billion back in 2008 and then put that investment into concrete programs like Mass Bio, Mass Challenge, new research centers for stem cell therapy, and really offering opportunities for students, startup entrepreneurs, and large pharma companies to get access to ideas, technology, funding, all within walking distance of Kendall Square, for example, which is where Cambridge Innovation Center is. So we have the underpinnings of a really strong emerging tech hub already in Baltimore. But in terms of some of those gaps and opportunity areas, I would say it's around physical infrastructure so that we have those types of anchor buildings, lab spaces for biotech startups that are accessible, and equitable opportunities so that we can have more minorities, more females in tech. So having workforce development, fellowship training, having all those pathways will really help Baltimore get to that next level as a tech hub. And as I mentioned earlier, I think because of our existing assets in life sciences related to biotech and also artificial intelligence, and Morgan State is a really big part of that. I believe Morgan State received $9 million from the federal government to create research centers for equitable AI and trustworthiness around AI, which is also a big topic in our society today.
And so when I hear a lot of talking about, the idea of we're looking to build infrastructure. We're looking to establish these anchors of places that people can go to do this research and to get the resources and manpower as well that they need to take on a lot of the different things we're talking about here. This sounds very foundational to me, right?
Yeah.
That you guys are laying a foundation for what you want to do to the future. I mean, how spot on is that?
That's correct, right? And I think it's not easy to go from where a market is to where a Kendall Square in Boston, Cambridge are, to create the types of technologies you see coming out of their research institutions. And it requires an entire ecosystem from interns from Boston to scientists coming out of the top schools to the executive talent that can take ideas to scale. And you have to really have organically been part of those ecosystems to create kind of an academic approach to replicate it.
Sure. And so it seems like you guys are trying to create that ecosystem in the first place and then cultivate it afterwards.
Yeah.
And I think that really speaks to, again, just how long-term the vision is for what your team is doing over at the Greater Baltimore Committee. And I think that's just paramount when it comes to revitalizing not just the city of Baltimore, but the Greater Baltimore area, you know. And I also want to talk about why I have you guys here. I know that there's a whole lot of reworking going on at the Greater Baltimore Committee. And could you tell me a little bit about the multi-year agenda that you guys have set out for yourself moving forward?
Yeah, part of what I thought was important really to get people excited about the merger was to move past kind of like I say, the new leadership and the new guy was to really show that we have a ambitious plan. And there are 12 specific initiatives that are mapped out in the plan that are all long-term thinking. The first part of it is to develop a 10-year strategy with TIP strategies out of Texas that's worked with all the top markets you can imagine. And locally, they worked with Montgomery County on their plan to really look at where the world economy is heading and how do we orient our communities and our infrastructure to support growth and opportunities in those areas. Everything else is really about the key facets of what successful economic development looks like. A regional brand, being strategic around the sites that we develop, and then building capacity to really market Baltimore for people here who are looking to grow and expand, and then people all over the world that are looking for markets in the United States. How do we make sure the region is on their radar?
Sure.
The second bucket is around infrastructure and transportation. Obviously, there's the active conversation with the Red Line.
Sure.
There's $1 trillion in federal money flowing into places all over the country. How do we get that fair share of that? Everything else is about collaboration as members around the vacant house issue, around public safety, and supporting local hiring and procurement, kind of the key areas of those.
Sure. And when you came up with this multi-year agenda yourself as the president and CEO, and many of your team members, I'm sure you were also very involved in that, Pothik, it really is a multi-year plan here where I think that you guys are kind of in not a wait and see mode, but let us build mode is the way that I've kind of seen it. And what comes with being in that state of the the beginning stages of a long-term project? Because I'm sure that part of it is I just want to see it. I just want everything to be there, and I want to see all the fruits of our labor. But I'm sure there's also some excitement in the beginning stages if we can really mold this in our own vision. So I mean, kind of what's going through the team's head right now in terms of where you guys are at versus where you want to be?
I think the team's happy and excited, right? I think you definitely counter naysayers and people who have never seen the GBC in the way that it's going to be shaped. And so part of being the outsider coming in is how I thought about this when coming here is how radical would it be for me to bring all the experiences and all the talent we're going to hire to Baltimore, which is one of the greatest places on earth, and help us collectively bring our economy to the next level. Like that is what everyone who's coming on board is committed to, right? But I have so much support from business. So much of our agenda was crafted from just listening. And so every idea that we put in our plan was something that people really thought was missing as far as the business or the civic leadership and organizations across the region providing that guidance on. And that's where I wanted to make sure we're filling that void.
And as a newer member of the team here, Pothik, again, my name is Gabe Ortiz, speaking right now with the Chief Economic Officer of the Greater Baltimore Committee, Pothik Chatterjee, and the President and CEO, Mark Anthony Kay here. So I'm curious, as a newer member of the team, when you're looking at this long-term vision, how important is it to have everybody be bought in to what you're trying to do? And how would you say the Greater Baltimore Committee, outside of the president and CEO, who this is kind of his brainchild, how do you see the rest of the team really buying into this effort, and even you personally?
Yeah, it's really, really important from my perspective that the members that we work with, the consortiums that we build, are able to truly collaborate and trust each other and break across some of the silos that have existed in Baltimore, particularly from the industry that I come from. So I come from a healthcare and technology background. I've worked in hospitals for almost the past decade, most recently at Sinai Hospital of Baltimore with LifeBridge Health, before that at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. And what you see in an industry like healthcare is that it's often pretty resistant to change because there's a lot of risk with changing how you deliver care, and there's safety issues that doctors and nurses and patients have to think about when you're adding technology like AI and apps into the mix. So I'm used to dealing with audiences that are somewhat resistant to change. So I have a lot of experience showing people, here's the long-term vision of where we want to get to as a city, as a region, as a country. But it's also important, to your point, that we have short-term successes and wins. And part of what I found, even in these last 2 months with the GBC around the Tech Hub's work, is that we already have short-term successes. We just don't always do a great job of storytelling our own success to our own stakeholders and externally as well. For example, did you know that Baltimore already ranks number 14 in America for top tech talent?
Really?
In addition to that, we have the highest R&D funding in the country.
Wow.
Because of our R1 research institutions. Now, where we don't compete as well is when you go further along the commercialization funnel and the companies start getting bigger. We could certainly use more venture capital investment presence here, more accelerators and companies that work with those larger startups. So there's still room for growth.
Sure.
But I think that GBC can play a really important role, and programs like this are certainly helpful to show the accomplishments that we do have. And add on top of that, we are the most diverse tech talent and tech market in the country. So we already have a diverse population of entrepreneurs, investors, and I think a federal funding opportunity of $1 billion could really help us jumpstart the tech ecosystem to be competitive with the Silicon Valleys, New Yorks, and Bostons of America.
And I'm sure we've already mentioned some of this, during this conversation, but how do you connect that, right? How do you go from having, the most funded R&D in the country, and the more I think about it with institutions like Johns Hopkins and all the highly rated hospitals and research facilities we have in and around the D.C. area, it makes a little bit more sense. I was a lot more surprised, to be honest, that we're 14th in tech talent.
Yeah,
so, I mean, how do you make that connection between having the funding, having the talent, kind of being homegrown here in this area, and getting those bigger venture capitalists, getting those bigger companies to decide to set up shop in the greater Baltimore area? What's kind of the plan to connect those two pieces of the puzzle? Because I feel like that's critical. And once it does happen, then, the sky's the limit at that point, right? Yeah. And either of you guys can hop in here.
Sure. So the way that our GBC consortium for this Tech Hubs opportunity is thinking about it is over the medium term. So the projects that we have to come up with our Baltimore region around AI and biotech have to be over the next 5 years. And it's in phases, but the initial or the second phase in the fall is for approximately $100 million of funding. So we're already being asked to think strategically about these infrastructure projects, about regional funding resources for minority entrepreneurs, female founders. So I think that's helping. But in terms of connecting the technology success and incentivizing more investors to move here and larger companies to move here, I think that once we get the Tech Hub designation in the fall, I'm going to manifest that into existence, and we're invited to move forward. And then once we get that funding as well, I think that's going to have a trickle effect and a halo effect, because the private sector will notice that Baltimore has all these ecosystem benefits, and that's going to make us more competitive. Mark, I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, I think there is a broader way that you do business investment and expansion, that there's a blueprint for how to do that. And if anything, we rewrote the blueprint after COVID, because the way founders and the way companies expand and the way industrial projects started determining their locations, all of that was transformed because how we work transformed, right? And so if anything, I want to bring that, at least the freshest leadership, which is one of the reasons we have TIP strategies hired to map out that plan so that we can really get the freshest take of what competition looks like today.
And I'm curious, because we just heard Pothik talk about how a lot of folks are resistant to change, right? Yeah. Particularly in a lot of the industries that you guys are looking to utilize to revitalize a lot of the greater Baltimore area and Baltimore City specifically. And I know that you personally have, done a lot of this kind of work in a lot of different cities across the country. When you're working here in Baltimore, what kind of level of resistance are you getting versus maybe some of the other countries or some of the other cities that you've worked with throughout the country? Because when I think of Baltimore, I feel like it's a place where people are saying, we're ready to try, just about anything to get ahead right now. So I'm curious how Baltimore is stacked up in regards to other places that you've worked in terms of trying to implement some radical change like you guys are trying to do. And is it more resistant? Is it less resistant? Where does it fall on that spectrum?
So in some way, I feel like I've had the hardest jobs in the past. This is less resistant versus people are comfortable with the status quo, or with the stagnant growth, right? And that's what we need to change. And so it's much more, it will pull much more from the inspirational and the aspirational part of our work to really show people that we can bring jobs and we can bring opportunities to places that have felt like they've given up hope, right?
Sure.
But when I think of the issues that I had to counter in Western Pennsylvania, where 9 out of the 10 counties I served were largely rural, very natural gas, coal communities, and changing the thinking there that new types of manufacturing can belong here was something I was proud of. Like, that was hard.
Yeah, I'm sure it was very, very hard. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Is that when you were out in Pittsburgh?
Yeah,
Okay,
so you think
gotcha.
about the politics involved on a national level in just the energy conversation and being kind of thrust in between that and saying, look, manufacturing is now chips, is defense contractors, is EV, is all types of new technologies and intersecting with robotics and autonomous systems. We can have these types of investments in rural communities here too, right?
Sure.
So that took a lot of hard work, but you see the impact now there. And so I feel like I've had that process, and it's been a good blueprint for what we need to do here.
And I think that we can already kind of see some of the early stages of that in this multi-year agenda that you and your team have laid out. I could talk to you guys for the next 2 hours, but unfortunately we're right up against the break. Okay. So I got to cut it here, but this has been a fantastic conversation, as it always is. I really appreciate both of you guys coming on, and honestly, anytime you guys have anything you want to talk about in the future, and particularly in the fall when we figure out if we will or won't be getting a tech hub, and I feel like we will be getting that. I'm going to join Pothik's manifestation here and bringing that right here to Baltimore, because I know we deserve it. I know you guys are working very hard on the front lines and on the ground to make that happen. And I mean, every time I bring you guys on, I feel like the strides that are being made by you and your team are just exponential. So I hope it keeps building on top of itself. And I'm really, really happy that we got talented guys such as yourself to come from all across the country right here into Baltimore, because this is a place that I think is so raw for opportunity and so raw for innovation. And it seems like that's a lot of your priority. So I really, really appreciate both of you coming on today. And I would love to have you on again, hopefully sooner rather than later. I'll tell you what, before I let you get out of here, just let the people know if they want to help out the GBC, if they want to donate, if they want to get involved, what's the best way they can get more information about the Greater Baltimore Committee?
Yeah, tell them to check out our website, gbc.org. And we actually have all of our contact information there. So
awesome. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Coming up next on Two-Way Talk, we're going to be speaking with the founder and owner of Sage Cosmetic Tattoo, talk about that entrepreneurial journey and bringing business right here to Baltimore. All that and more coming up on the other side. You're listening to Two-Way Talk with me, Gabe Ortiz, on WEAA 88.9 FM, the voice of the community.
Never miss your favorite WEAA program again. Download the WEAA mobile app from the Google Play or Apple Store and listen to WEAA in your car, in your house, and even when you are out of town. Also like, follow, and get up-to-date news and information by connecting with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WEAA.